Coming up, the Federal Reserve Bank is looking for ways to improve how data is collected about Indian country. And a Lummi elder fights for the return of a relative. Plus, Lakota elders take justice into their own hands in the Oyate court. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amirawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. Changes are coming to the correctional program at the Bureau of Indian Affairs after 16 inmates died while in BIA-operated detention facilities. The agency launched a 3-month review of their programs. On Monday, the agency came forward with more than 24 reforms. The changes include updating policies and creating consistent standards across their corrections facilities. Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs Brian Newland is leading the reform efforts. He said in a statement, "As the son of a corrections officer, I value the well-being of all people, those in our custody as well as those responsible for providing a safe and rehabilitative environment. We will not shy away from acknowledging the past and taking ownership of the path to improve conditions in our facilities. The reforms we are announcing today represent a new chapter for the Bureau of Indian Affairs as we move towards organizational culture change." Previous reporting by NPR investigated the conditions of BIA facilities, including the story of a 22-year-old man who died while in a holding cell, but whose body wasn't discovered for nearly 3 hours. There are a total of 96 corrections programs funded by the BIA. Earlier this week, the National Congress of American Indians held its annual State of Indian Nations address and its Executive Council winter session. At the conversations with high-level officials were members from the organization's Youth Commission. Jessica Lambert is the co-president of the group. In an interview with Indian Country Today, she urged tribal leaders to continue listening to young people.
Mostly because youth are the future, and we're already doing a lot of advocacy, especially when it comes to climate change, to mental health, to a lot of the issues that face us in Indian country. And a lot of these issues are specific to youth. And so we're already engaged in these policy arenas. And so making sure that, NCAI is adequately supporting us, helping us get access to leaders in Indian country, helping us have the resources we need to be able to push the issues that we face in our own communities as the youth of Indian country is crucial.
The NCAI Youth Commission is made up of college and high school students ages 16 to 23. The group discusses solutions to the challenges they feel are most pressing in their communities, then work towards advocacy with policymakers. A Venice, California lifestyle brand is under fire for claims of cultural appropriation. Native-owned brand The Insurgents is leading calls on social media, saying the company, Aviator Nation, is using Native cultures and profiting off of them. Insurgents has circulated promotional photos from Aviator Nation showing its owner posing in group photos with a teepee the brand sells on its website. And in other photos, models can be seen wearing traditional beaded plains-style moccasins. Leah Lewis is an artist and project leader with the Insurgents. She says these items have significance beyond selling clothes.
We feel at Insurgents this is just really problematic because of her misuse of the teepee and the moccasins. For example, the moccasins are very sacred to our people. There's so much work that goes into them. Each pattern and color is significant to something, and individual families, they all have their own patterns. This is not just something to be worn as a prop.
Insurgents is now using its social media presence to tell the clothing line to stop appropriating aspects of Indigenous culture. And Insurgent says it has not yet heard from Aviator Nation regarding its list of demands. People across Indian country celebrated the contributions of a civil rights champion. February 16th was celebrated as Elizabeth Peratrovich Day in the state of Alaska. Speakers from across the state joined together in a virtual celebration. They described how her testimony in 1945 led to the adoption of the nation's first anti-discrimination law. Prior to Peratrovich's testimony, Alaska Native people were discriminated against. They were restricted to eating and living at certain places, as well as where they could attend school. Peratrovich's advocacy called out this discrimination, eventually passing legislation to fix it. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, the fight to return a whale to the Salish Sea. A Lummi elder is leading the charge. Stay with us. Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut's is a southern resident orca who was captured from the Salish Sea in the 1970s. The whale is at the Sea Aquarium in Miami, Florida, where advocates say her health is rapidly declining. Raynell Morris is an elder from the Lummi Nation who has been advocating to free Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut for many years. The Lummi people refer to the whales as the people who live under the waves and call them their relatives. Morris was first on the ICT Newscast in 2020 to explain the capture and how more than 75 tribes support bringing Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut home. Here's a recap of that interview.
We had a ceremony out in our islands where her home is and her family is, and our ancestors told us that it was our sacred obligation to bring her home, to make her whole with her family. We will heal the Salish Sea, heal the salmon, heal Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut, and that in turn will heal our people. Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut, all the way in Miami, sings her song from her mother, calling out for her to hear her. As a mother and as a grandmother, if anybody came and took my child, that loss, that hurt, would be there forever, even when they're brought home. It's still traumatic. She was violently captured. There were 4 orcas that died in that capture, and there were 7 that were taken. And from 1970, Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut is the only survivor, which is tribute to her spirit, to her mother's spirit, to everyone that prays for her to come home. We prayed with her. We carried a message from her mother that they'll be reunited soon. We apologized to her, asked for her forgiveness. That has taken so long. But to keep the fight, keep her spirit.
Welcome back to the ICT Newscast, Raynell.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So when you were first on, you talked about the declining health of Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut. What updates do you have about how she's doing now?
Well, we are concerned because there are so many conflicting reports. This last week, PETA issued a report from a whistleblower that said she had pneumonia, and that's just, a serious and sometimes fatal illness. So we have been trying all along since I last updated you to get current, valid health information and behavioral information, because we also had reports that were unvalidated, but reports that said she was frustrated, she was showing aggression, and neither one of those are healthy for her, given her captivity in a small cement tank. So we are highly concerned and advocating for an independent expert veterinary to go in and do a current comprehensive health exam and behavioral exam so we know what is actually happening to her and what does she need to get healthy.
In terms of getting accurate data and updated reports on her health, you mentioned that it sounds like there's some barriers there. Can you talk more about what those barriers are?
Well, she's a corporate asset for Palace Entertainment. That's the owner of Miami Seaquarium. And after the PETA report, they issued a live stream of her performing, doing commands with her trainer and saying that, look how happy and well she is. And so their corporate statement is she was ill and now she's recovered. And we're saying there's too much of a discrepancy between this report and this report. We want the truth. She deserves the truth. And so if they're doing everything they can for her, what would the objection be to get an independent veterinarian there to do the exam? And we've offered to pay for it.
At the end of that recap, you said that the captivity and the capture of Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut's is very similar to the idea of missing Indigenous relatives. How do you feel about that connection in terms of this actually being your relative and you fighting to bring her home?
It's heart-wrenching, but at the same time, as an Indian elder, it's been given to me as my sacred obligation to bring her home. I look at her and I call her our Salish sea daughter. And her mother, Ocean Sun, from the L pod, is still alive. So Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut's is 56. Her mother is deemed to be 93. She still has 37 years of her life if we can get her proper health care and get her out of the cement tank she's in. And so that would be like me living elsewhere and them telling me I'm too old to travel home. We travel home no matter what, no matter the risk, no matter the hardship, we make it home. And that's what we're doing for her.
Raynell, I'd love to hear an update on the support for bringing her home. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, we've been able to garner support from all over the globe. Indigenous peoples, non-tribal people, but it's from around the world that reach out to us. And what we ask them to do is to pray for her. We ask them to write letters to the mayor of Miami-Dade, to write to USDA, to NOAA, and help advocate for an independent expert evaluation of her is the most important next step.
And I understand there's actually been some legal action in terms of trying to get her home. Can you tell us updates on that?
Yes, we've been very blessed to acquire the assistance of the Earth Law Center to represent myself and Tomas Ellie Kinley. And we sent a letter of intent to sue a couple of years ago, and they're still our partner. They're still looking at legal avenues. They're still writing letters on our behalf. And the other important update, in addition to the legal, is we've now, through the generous donations of advocates, been able to complete a operational plan, a Lummi for her Lummi home here.
And Raynell, we only have a few seconds left, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk to Indian Country about why you think it's important to bring her home. And as you mentioned before, it sounds like it's your life work to be able to do that.
It is so important that we all support Indigenous people's efforts to protect and reunify their sacred sites, land, peoples. It's our job to support each other, stand together. Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut's, stand strong together.
Raynell, thank you so much.
Hi, Sk'aliCh'elh. Thank you, my friend.
Public and private sectors rely on good data to make decisions. Tribes are no different, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis wants to help and is looking for better ways to collect information about the economy. The bank's Center for Indian Country Development leads these efforts. Casey Lozar joins us to describe this initiative. He is the Minneapolis Vice President and Director of the Center for Indian Country Development. Welcome to the ICT Newscast, Casey.
Well, thank you, Aaliyah. It's nice to be with you today.
So tell us about this year-long initiative and what you hope to accomplish.
Well, excellent. Yeah, the Center for Indian Country Development is excited to be expanding our capacity to be able to collect data and do economic research to help us better understand tribal economies and to help tribes with decision-making as it relates to evidence-based policy making for their tribal communities. So we are very excited to be expanding our capacity in being able to collect data that's relevant to American Indian, Alaska Native people and tribes across this country, and to do it in partnership with tribal governments, tribal leaders, and other tribal organizations.
Exactly what kinds of data are you going to be collecting, and how are you going to find it?
That's a great question. A lot of the data for American Indian, Alaska Native people is collected through the federal government through statistical agencies like census, for example. And the center plans to partner with those agencies to identify ways to collect additional data around American Indian and Alaska Native conditions, characteristics, backgrounds, et cetera. So we have a deeper understanding of the lived experience in Indian country.
Yesterday on the show, we were talking about the barriers to collecting data in healthcare and in COVID-19 data. What are the barriers to collecting data on the economy in Indian country?
That's a really good question. There's a couple factors that make it particularly challenging historically. And one of those is just the rural nature of many of our tribal communities. It's more difficult with a few barriers such as broadband or the lack of broadband in our tribal communities. A lot of surveys really require electronic survey taking. And so that is sort of out of the gate a challenge to collect data in Indian country. And then the second is you look at a lot of the survey work and data collection efforts, and there's just an undersampling of American Indian and Alaska Native people, which doesn't allow us to make precise calculations of what's happening in Indian country. And so those are a few of the things we want to tackle in this expanded capacity to work with those agencies to be able to get more American Indian participation in those surveys.
And ultimately, when this data is collected, how is it going to be used? Is it going to be used to sort of shape policy or to, I guess, just create a benchmark for where we're at in 2022?
That's a great question. The Federal Reserve is an independent institution. And so at the center, we say our job of collecting the data and when appropriate, making it publicly available for tribal leaders, for tribal organizations and other policymakers to access that data and do some analysis. We will too be doing analysis on this data to really with the goal of helping to inform policy to grow our tribal economies, both sort of in the short term, but sort of arm Indian country with with data to think long-term about long-term economic prosperity and stability for our tribal economies. And currently, right now, we have a dashboard, for example, that we created that tracks labor market conditions in Indian country. We have some reservation profiles that we've developed that through this additional data initiative, we plan to expand. And those are targeting not only just Indian country, but individual reservation communities. And we just see providing additional data will allow policymakers at all levels of government to be able to make those evidence-based policy decisions.
Speaking of tribal leaders, what has been the reaction of them from this initiative? Are they excited, or what has been their reaction?
Absolutely. Tribal leaders are excited that the center is sort of taking on this very, very big task, right, of having more robust data in Indian country. We hear it time and time again from tribal leaders from all across the country that we just need more data to help inform our decisions. So we've already heard from quite a few tribal leaders about the sort of data projects that would be meaningful in Indian country, and many tribes that have showed interest in partnering with the center as we sort of explore this long-term data initiative.
What are some of the ways that you plan on doing that? I think you've frequently brought up working in partnership with community. And as you said, there have been historically many wrongdoings in collecting data about tribal nations. But how is this initiative different in terms of, remedying those issues?
Well, I think it comes down to sort of being in Indian country and listening and learning to the types of data that will be important to tribes. So I previously mentioned, the statistical agencies that are conducting surveys. So thinking about the potential of additional questions that could be asked for those surveys and getting feedback from Indian country on those questions. Additionally, the center anticipates doing our own surveys. And so we want to make sure that the survey questions and the use of that data is really sort of anchored to what our tribal communities are experiencing. And so those partnerships and getting this continual loop of feedback from our tribal leaders is really going to make this initiative successful and meaningful, a meaningful initiative for tribal people.
Well, Casey, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
Racial disparities plague the criminal justice system in Rapid City, South Dakota, where natives make up a fraction of the city's residents, but more than half of the jail population. Today, a circle of elders is playing a direct role in trying to change that. Stuart Huntington has more.
Chris White Eagle's youth program uses Lakota culture to put and keep kids on a healthy path. He's helping to bring that same philosophy to the criminal justice system as part of the new Oyate court that takes cases off the state docket and puts them into the hands of a circle of Lakota elders. The goal is to heal those who get arrested instead of punishing them.
When they get in trouble and stuff, just locking them up and just thinking that's going to fix the problem, it ain't. I think with the Oyate court, we look more deeper into trying to heal them. We get to ask the questions the courts don't ask, get to the root of the problem.
Which seems to be getting results. The Oyate, or People's Court, launched late last year as a new diversion program out of the Pennington County State's Attorney's Office, is already expanding.
We went from going every other week to every week. So, there's growth.
Which means more help for people like Robert Jones, who got into a fight and was facing serious felony charges. He was scared.
When you're just in the Western courts, you don't feel like there's anybody there with you. You know what I mean? You feel like you're alone, and that's what that's what people get so scared of is, that the feeling alone, that feeling of something bad's gonna happen.
But he says he was even more apprehensive when his case got switched to the new Oyate court.
When it comes to the elders being in the circle, it's nerve-wracking because they're really talking to you, saying things to you that make you like sit there and think like, dang, like I really need to do better. I really need to get my life together. You know what I mean? They give you that extra push. They give you that motivation because they are your elders. And sometimes that extra push is what you need. And I guess that's what made me like really nervous because I didn't know if I had it in me to be able to sit there and take the extra push.
He did. He's now employed, not getting into fights, and happily raising his infant son. It's the kind of result prosecutors seek. It's the kind of results the Oyate court, using a traditional indigenous peacemaking approach, many people believe can deliver.
The elders hear that case, they ask questions of the participant, and they get to the real heart of the matter, and then they come up with a plan to address whatever the real issue is. And it's remarkable to see. It's been remarkable to see. And that's really, I think, how we move forward with criminal justice in the 21st century. We're not going to solve problems by incarcerating people. We know that.
In Rapid City, Stuart Huntington, ICT Newscast.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand, just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.